The Sony ZV-E10 is built to be a more advanced blogging camera than, say, the ZV-1 or even the ZV-1F. It offers interchangeable lenses, a larger sensor, and of course, it's easier to use. But the biggest drawback is the lack of in-body image stabilization and, of course, that dreaded jello. So today we're going to run a few tests to see just how well we can stabilize footage shot on the Sony ZV-E10. And to do so, we're actually going to do two things. First, we're going to test it against the active Steadyshot in camera, and then we're going to shoot some stuff with the gyro stabilized, and then actually use Sony's Catalyst Browse software to stabilize it in post. I'm Joel, and on this channel you'll find videos about filmmaking, photography, and just other randomness. So now I've had the ZV-E10 now for a little over a year, and I basically use it for three main things. The first of which is using it to be my main camera for videos like this. Usually when I do that, I have it stabilized on a tripod. Now the second thing I generally have been using it for is as a lightweight and compact camera to create images and vlog content for my travel website as well as my YouTube channel, my other YouTube channel I should say. And then of course the third thing that I'm using the ZV-E10 for is capturing stock photos and stock video when I'm out and about. So now I've actually used it as a vlogging camera as well, somewhat successfully. But I have had a really hard time with the lack of image stabilization.
Is that what it's called? Boynton Canyon?
Yeah, I think so. Boynton.
Yeah, I think the last time we went for a hike was actually in Sedona, Arizona, and that's a video that no one's seen yet because we're so far behind in editing.
So now recently I've picked up the Sony 11mm 1.8 lens to pair with my ZV-E10. Now this is essentially a way for me to hopefully use that as a lightweight kind of a vlogging camera, hopefully seeing if that's a good solution for it. So today we're going to shoot with that Sony 11mm paired with the ZV-E10, and that's basically going to give us a field of view of equivalency of about a 16mm on a full frame camera, which is actually pretty good for a vlogging focal range. We will then test the raw unstabilized footage versus the active stabilization, which crops in about 40% into your field of view. So basically when you have your active stabilization turned on, you go from a 16mm full frame field of view to an effective field of view of about 23mm. We will also test a really neat feature that the Sony ZV-E10 has, which is gyroscopic stabilization. To do so, I actually ran that raw footage again, but this time through the free Catalyst Browse software from Sony. So first off, let's start with just the unstabilized raw footage.
Okay, and now we've got exactly the same setup, but this time I've got everything turned off, so no stabilization whatsoever. And again, I am arms reach out, and I'm simply holding on to this camera, so this is like, you know, vlogger mode here. And see how well this holds up.
As you can see, it's really shaky.
Wiggle in here. Hopefully no like major jello issues or anything like that. So we'll see.
Next, let's look at it with active stabilization turned on.
So we are shooting with the Sony ZV-E10, and I've got the 11mm on here. It's a 1.8 lens.
Notice how much that cropped in?
aps-c, so it's perfect.
I mean, it's much better, but it's still a little too cropped in for my taste.
Stabilization on it. So
that 16mm field of view is now 23mm.
And I've got my arm at, there's full arm's length for me, so you can get an idea of what this looks like.
So now let's see how well Catalyst Browse did with that same unstabilized footage.
Okay, and now we've got exactly the same setup, but this time I've got everything turned on.
Now, this footage is actually cropped in 10% in Catalyst Browse, and then it's also up-resed that same 10% back in Premiere to kind of make up the difference.
Mode here, and see how well this holds up. I'm guessing there's going to be some wiggle in here. Hopefully no like major jello issues or anything like that. So we'll see.
Finally, let's see how much further we can stabilize the active stabilized footage through Catalyst Browse.
So we were shooting with the Sony ZV-E10.
This is using a 10% crop in Catalyst Browse and up-resed another 10% in Premiere in order to make up for that crop.
This camera. And right now we're just testing out the...
I have to say that does still crop in quite a bit into the image. So, not a real fan of that.
Full arm's length for me, so you can get an idea of what this looks like.
So now let's see how our non-stabilized clip looks versus Catalyst Browse. And now let's look at that active stabilized clip versus the active stabilized clip further stabilized with Catalyst Browse. And now everything together. So what is your thoughts on which of those clips was the best? Personally, I think the unstabilized footage processed through Catalyst Browse was the best in this scenario. For one, it didn't crop in too much, so it didn't draw your attention too much to like all of the bumps as much. I mean, it's still not great, but it's still a lot better in my opinion, at least. Now, we probably could get a little bit more improvement if we crop in even more in Catalyst Browse, like maybe 15% or so. But that means that we'd also be cropping in more. And now we're getting closer and closer to just like the same use of the active mode. Now, finally, it's also important to know that running clips through Catalyst Browse is very time consuming and processor heavy. In fact, I used an Asus ZenBook Duo, which is an i9, 32 megs of RAM, and an RTX 2060 graphics card built in. And each raw 36-second clip took about 4 minutes for me to render through Catalyst Browse. If you need your handheld footage, whether it be for your vlog or stock footage or whatever type of content you're doing, and you need it out quickly, and you don't want to spend a lot of extra time in post, then you're probably best to use something else like a gimbal. But if you only have a few clips that you need stabilized, then I think Catalyst Browse actually does a pretty darn good job. So be sure to check out some additional stabilization tests that I've done here on the channel. I've actually taken the same ZV-E10 clips that you saw here and actually ran them through Topaz Video AI as in one video. And then I also compared them against using a gimbal. Now, if you're interested in purchasing any of the gear that I've used in this video or any of the software, you can check out the links in the description. You can also buy Scarlett, my computer, a beer to